her shovel in hand. She roams the universe, exploring every land. No map, no reverse. Oh, dig a 420, curious Canuck. Answers on your mind, never getting stuck. Riding waves of stars through the cosmic sea, finding who we are in the galaxy. She's got questions to ask and a fire that won't die, unraveling each task under the sky. Oh, dig a 420, curious Canuck. Answers on your mind, never getting stuck. Riding waves of stars through the cosmic sea, finding who we are in the galaxy. She's got questions to ask and a fire that won't die, unraveling each task under the sky. Oh, dig a 420, curious Canuck. Answers on your mind, never getting stuck.
Because, you know.
Hello, hello, hello. How is everyone this morning? It's Thursday. We're nearly there. Thank goodness for that. Let's see here. I guess it would help if I was looking at the comments, right? Hello, Bishop. Hello, Swan Lake Lady. How's it going, you guys? How is everyone this morning? It is the weirdest kind of morning. We had, it felt like spring all last week. We had 14 degrees Celsius. You can do your own freedom figure math, whatever, you Americans over there. But it was like up to 14 degrees Celsius, warm, definitely a warm springtime. And suddenly it got cold. And then yesterday it got colder and wet. And I woke up this morning to snow on the ground and big, wet, chunky snowflakes falling from the ground. So it's kind of turned into rain now, and it'll probably be gone in a little while. Hello, Linda. I've been thinking about you, hun. You've been on my mind. I hope you're doing well. I'm really glad to see you. But yeah, it's already probably going to be melted by the time, the day is done, and it'll be wet and gross again. But it was very strange. It got super duper cold suddenly. It was very weird weather we're having. So we are just about to finish Oliver Sacks' The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. We've got 2 chapters left. I forgot I can't remember what the 4th part was called. Let's go to the beginning, and that's where they'll write it, right? Because it was broken into 4 sections. There we go. The World of the Simple. There it is. So we read Rebecca and A Walking Grove. The terminology in here, YouTube, is as was used in the book. Please do not get mad at me for using these terms because it's in the book. Okay, this is an old book. These were written long, long ago, and they were the proper terms of the time. Please and thank you. Oh, I'm glad you're feeling better. You've really been on my mind the last week or so. You've really been on my mind, hun. So I'm glad to hear you're doing better. That's good. Long way to perfect, but better is always good. Oh, I'm glad to hear it. So yeah, this has been a really good book. I don't know about you guys, but I've really enjoyed it. You have it on Audible. Okay. Where they're not stumbling over silly words. um, it's interesting. I like the fact that it's making me use other types of words that I don't use often. I had a huge vocabulary. I am a reader, a voracious reader. I would never like the way people treat their cell phones. That's how I was with the book. There was always a book in my hand. It was like a part of my person. So when I stopped being able um, to read and retain the stuff that I was reading, I found even favorite books that I'd read so many times, I'd have to go back and reread and go back to catch it because I wasn't retaining what was happening. And it was very frustrating. And I kind of turned to TV and movies for a while, but it's just not the same. So I like that here. I've been told when you read something and you speak something and you write something is the best way to retain something. And in fact, that's how I always studied for exams. Reading and rewriting and reading and rewriting. So I'm hoping that the reading and speaking, 2 out of the 3 is good enough to help me retain it. I will definitely be rereading this book on my own. But it helps to have people here who can help me, because my thing is I see the word on the page and it's a word I know and I've known in the past. But suddenly I can't hear it in my head. Normally when I'm reading, I hear it in my head as I'm reading. Pardon me. When I'm just reading to myself, I hear it in my head as I'm reading it. And suddenly as I'm reading it, there are words that I don't know. I can't hear how I can't even sound it out. Like they tell you when you're little and you're learning how to read, sound it out. I can't even do that sometimes. So it's really helping to read it out loud to you guys, and you guys can prompt me when I'm really struggling. So I appreciate it. This has been very helpful to me. I will let you know, I've got the next book we're going to read. I'll put it out here. It's very exciting. Most of you already know him. Did I take out? Let's put the bookmark back in, right? Most of you know Steve Gosney. This is the first, get the shine off it. This is the first book he wrote. I am very lucky. I have got a first edition. I have got a signed first edition. And I emailed him. That really takes the shine off the TV, eh? There. But I emailed him. He gave me permission to read his book next. He's done me one better. He just emailed me the latest edition of the book. So I'll be reading it off the screen because it's the latest edition. It won't be quite the same as mine, but I want to make sure that you guys know I do own his book. I love it. You can see, yeah, before I was putting it aside, I was already almost halfway through it again. It's really awesome. One of the things I like about this book, the weight of the pages, they don't get all crumpled and dinged easily. And also the size of the font, it's going to be a lot easier to look at than some of the other books. But I've got the most recent edition to read for us, and I'm very, very excited. So we'll start that next week. I know we will definitely finish this book, The Man Who, today. So hello, Lexi. Hello, Bulls Deep. How you guys doing? All right. Well, like I said, this is the part 4, The World of the Simple. This is chapter 23, The Twins. When I first met the twins, John and Michael, in 1966 in a state hospital, they were already well known. They had been on radio and television and made the subject of detailed scientific and popular reports. They had even, I suspected, found their way into science fiction, a little fictionalized, but essentially as portrayed in the accounts that had been published. Robert Silverberg's novel Thorns, 1967, in particular pages 11 through 17. So, Robert Silverberg, Thorns, if you're interested. The twins, who were then 26 years old, had been in institutions since the age of 7, variously diagnosed as autistic, psychotic, or severely retarded. Most of the accounts concluded that, as idiot savants go, there was nothing much to them, except for their remarkable documentary memories of the tiniest visual details of their own experience, and their use of an unconscious calendrical algorithm that enabled them to say at once on what day of the week a date far in the past or future would fall. This is the view taken by Stephen Smith in his comprehensive and imaginative book, The Great Mental Calculators. There have been, to my knowledge, no further studies of the twins since the 1960s, the brief interest they aroused being quenched by the apparent solution of the problems they presented. But this, I believe, is a misapprehension, perhaps a natural enough one in view of the stereotyped approach, the fixed format of questions, the concentration on one task or another, with which the original investigators approached the twins, and by which they reduced them, their psychology, their methods, their lives, almost to nothing. The reality is far stranger, far more complex, far less explicable than any of these studies suggest. But it is not even to be glimpsed by aggressive formal testing or the usual 60 minutes like interviewing of the twins. Not that any of these studies or TV performances is wrong. They are quite reasonable, often informative as far as they go, but they confine themselves to the obvious and testable surface and do not go to the depths, do not even hint or perhaps guess at the depths there are below. One indeed gets no hint of any depths unless one ceases to test the twins, to regard them as subjects. One must lay aside the urge to limit and test and get to know the twins, observe them openly, quietly, without presuppositions, but with a full and sympathetic phenomenological openness as they live and think and interact quietly, pursuing their own lives spontaneously in their singular way. Then one finds there is something exceedingly mysterious at work, powers and depths of perhaps fundamental sort, which I have not been able to solve in the 18 years that I have known them. They are, indeed, unprepossessing at first encounter, a sort of Tweedledum and Tweedledee, indistinguishable mirror images, identical in face, in body movements, in personality, in mind, identical too in their stigmata of brain and tissue damage. They are undersized, with disturbing disproportions in head and hands, high-arched palates, high-arched feet, monotonous squeaky voices, a variety of peculiar tics and mannerisms, and a very high degenerative myopia, requiring glasses so thick that their eyes seem distorted, giving them the appearance of absurd little professors peering and pointing with a misplaced, obsessed, and absurd concentration. And this impression is fortified as soon as one quizzes them, or allows them, as they are apt to do, like pantomime puppets, to start spontaneously on one of their routines. This is the picture that has been presented in published articles and on stage. They tend to be featured in the annual show in the hospital I work in, and in their not infrequent and rather embarrassing appearances on TV. The facts under these circumstances are established monotony. The twins say, give us a date any time in the last or next 40,000 years. You give them a date, and almost instantly they'll tell you what day of the week it would have been. Another date, they cry, and the performance is repeated. They will also tell you the date of Easter during the same period, 80,000 years. In the same period of 80,000 years. One may observe, though this is not usually mentioned in the reports, that their eyes move and fix in a peculiar way as they do this, as if they were unrolling or scrutinizing an inner landscape, a mental calendar. They have the look of seeing, of intense visualization, although it has been concluded that what is involved is pure calculation. Their memory for digits is remarkable and possibly unlimited. They will repeat a number of 3 digits or 30 digits or 30 digits or 300 digits with equal ease. This too has been attributed to a method. But when one comes to test their ability to calculate, the typical forte of arithmetical prodigies and mental calculators, they do astonishingly badly, as badly as their IQs of 60 might lead one to think. They cannot do simple addition or subtraction with any accuracy and cannot even comprehend with multiplication or division means. What is this? Calculators who cannot calculate and lack even the most rudimentary powers of arithmetic? And yet they are called calendar calculators, and it has been inferred and accepted on next to no grounds that what is involved is not memory at all, but the use of an unconscious algorithm for calendar calculations. When one recollects how even Carl Friedrich Gauss, one of the greatest of mathematicians and of calculators too, had the utmost difficulty in working out an algorithm for the date of Easter, it is scarcely credible that these twins, incapable of even the simplest arithmetical methods, could have inferred, worked out, and be using such an algorithm. A great many calculators, it is true, do have a larger repertoire of methods and algorithms they have worked out for themselves, and perhaps this predisposed pardon me. And perhaps this predisposed W.A. Horowitz et al. To conclude that this was true of the twins too. Stephen Smith, taking these early studies at face value, comments, something mysterious, though commonplace, is operating here. The mysterious human ability to form unconscious algorithms on the basis of examples. If this were the beginning and the end of it, they might indeed be seen as commonplace and not mysterious at all. For the computing of algorithms, which can be done well by machine, is essentially mechanical and comes into the spheres of problems, but not mysteries. And yet, even some of their performances, their tricks, there is a quality that takes one aback. They can tell one the weather and the events of any day in their lives. Any day from about their 4th year on. Their way of talking, well conveyed by novelist Robert Silverberg in his portrayal of the character Melangio in Thorns, is at once childlike, detailed, and without emotion. Give them a date, and their eyes roll for a moment, and then fixate. And in a flat, monotonous voice, they tell you of the weather, pardon me, the bare political events they would have heard of, and the events of their own lives. This last often including the painful or poignant anguish of childhood, the contempt, the jeers, and the mortifications they endured, but all delivered in an even and unvarying tone, without the least hint of any personal inflection or emotion. Here, clearly, one is dealing with memories that seem of a documentary kind, in which there is no personal reference, no personal relation, no living center whatsoever. It might be said that personal involvement, emotion, has been edited out of these memories in the sort of defensive way one may observe in obsessive or schizoid types. And the twins must certainly be considered obsessive and schizoid. But it could be said equally, and indeed more plausibly, that memories of this kind never had any personal character. For this indeed is a cardinal characteristic of eidetic memory such as this. I kid you not, it has snowed so few times here this winter that even though it's already soppy, melting mess on the ground, the snowplow guys are out here trying to plow the concrete of the parking lot. They've maybe had to plow the road 4 times in a winter. This is supposed to be like 7 days a week sort of work. Like they don't stop all winter normally, and they've had to come out here 4 times. It's wild. And the fact that they're scraping pavement just to get paid is that kind of sucks for them. It might be said that personal involvement, emotion, has been edited out of these memories in a sort of defensive way one may observe in obsessive or schizoid types. And the twins must certainly be considered obsessive and schizoid. But it could be said equally, and indeed more plausibly, that the memories of this kind never had any personal character. For this indeed is a cardinal characteristic of eidetic memory, such as this. But what needs to be stressed, and this is insufficiently remarked on by their studiers, though perfectly obvious to native listener prepared to be amazed. It is the magnitude of the twins' memory, and its apparently limitless, if childish and commonplace, extent. And with this, the way in which memories are retrieved. And if you ask them how they can hold so much in their minds, a 300-figure digit, or the trillion events of 4 decades, they say very simply, we see it. And seeing or visualizing of extraordinary intensity, limitless range, and perfect fidelity seem to be the key to this. It seems a native physiological capacity of their minds, in a way which has some analogies to that by which A.R. Luria's famous patient, described in the mind of a mnemonist, saw, though perhaps the twins lack the rich Perhaps the twins lack the rich synesthesia and conscious organization of the mnemonist's memories. But there is no doubt, in my mind at least, that there is available to the twins a prodigious panorama, a sort of landscape or physiognomy of all they have ever heard or seen or thought or done, and that in the blink of an eye externally obvious externally obvious as a brief rolling and fixation of the eyes, they are able, with the mind's eye, to retrieve and see nearly anything that lies in this vast landscape. Such powers of memory are most uncommon, but they are hardly unique. We know little or nothing about why the twins or anyone else has them. Is there, then, anything in the twins that is of deeper interest, as I have been hinting? I believe there is. It is recorded of Sir Herbert Oakley, the 19th century Edinburgh professor of music, that once, taken to a farm, he heard a pig squeak and instantly cried, G sharp. Someone ran to the piano, and G sharp it was. My own first sight of the natural powers and natural mode of the twins came in a similar, spontaneous, and I could not help feeling a rather comic manner. A box of matches on their table fell and discharged its contents on the floor. 111, they both cried simultaneously. And then, in a murmur, John said 37. Michael repeated this. John said it a third time and stopped. I counted the matches. It took me some time, and there were 111. How could you count the matches so quickly? I asked. We didn't count. We saw the 111. Similar tales are told of Zachariah Dace, a number prodigy, who would instantly call out 183 or 79 if a pile of peas was poured out, and indicate as best he could. He was also a dullard, that he did not count the peas but just saw their number as a whole in a flash. And why did you murmur 37 and repeat it 3 times? I asked the twins. They said in unison, 37, 37, 37, 111. And this, if possible, I found even more puzzling. That they should see 111-ness in a flash was extraordinary, but perhaps no more extraordinary than Oakley's G sharp, a sort of absolute pitch, so to speak, for numbers. But they had then gone on to factor the number 111 without having any method, without even knowing in the ordinary way what factors meant. Had I not already observed that they were incapable of the simplest calculations and didn't understand or seem to understand what multiplication or division was? Yet now, spontaneously, they had divided a compound number into 3 equal parts. How did you work that out? I said, rather hotly. They indicated as best they could in poor, insufficient terms. But perhaps there are no words to correspond to such things, that they did not work it out, but just saw it in a flash. John made a gesture with 2 outstretched fingers and his thumb, which seemed to suggest that they had spontaneously trisected the number, or that it came apart of its own accord into these 3 equal parts by a sort of spontaneous numerical fission. They seemed surprised at my surprise, as if I were somehow blind, and John's gesture conveyed an extraordinary sense of immediate felt reality. Is it possible, I said to myself, that they can somehow see the properties, not in a conceptual abstract way, but as qualities, felt, sensuous, in some immediate concrete way, and not simply isolated qualities like the 111-ness, but qualities of relationship? Perhaps in somewhat the same way as Sir Herbert Oakley might have said a third or a fifth. I had already come to feel through their seeing events and dates that they could hold in their minds, and did hold, an immense mnemonic tapestry, a vast or possibly infinite landscape in which everything could be seen, either isolated or in relation. It was isolation rather than a sense of relation that was chiefly exhibited when they unfurled their implacable, haphazard documentary. But might not such prodigious powers of visualization, powers essentially concrete and quite distinct from conceptualization, might not such powers give them the potential of seeing relations, formal relations, relations of form, arbitrary or significant? If they could see the 111-ness at a glance, if they could see an entire constellation of numbers, might not they also see at a glance, see, recognize, relate, and compare in an entirely sensual and non-intellectual way enormously complex formulations and constellations of numbers? A ridiculous, even disabling power. I thought of what Borges writes about his character Ireneo Funes. We, at one glance, can perceive three glasses on a table. Funes can perceive all the leaves and tendrils and fruit that make up a grapevine, a circle drawn on a blackboard, a right angle, a lozenge. All these are forms we can fully and intuitively grasp. Ireneo could do the same with the stormy mane of a pony, with a herd of cattle on a hill. I don't know how many stars he could see in the sky. Hi, Christine. Could the twins, who seem to have a peculiar passion and grasp of numbers, could these twins who had seen the 111-ness at a glance, perhaps see in their minds a numerical vine with all the number leaves, number tendrils, number fruits that made it up? A strange, perhaps absurd, almost impossible thought. But what they had already shown me was so strange as to be almost beyond comprehension. And it was, for all I knew, the merest hint of what they might do. I thought about the matter, but it hardly bore thinking about, and then I forgot it. Forgot it until a second spontaneous scene, a magical scene, which I blundered into completely by chance. This second time, they were seated in a corner together, with a mysterious secret smile on their faces, a smile I had never seen before, enjoying the strange pleasure and peace they now seemed to have. I crept up quietly so as not to disturb them. They seemed to be locked in a singular, purely numerical converse. John would say a number, a six-figure number. Michael would catch the number, nod, smile, and seem to savor it. Then he, in turn, would say another six-figure number. And now it was John who received and appreciated it richly. They looked at first like two connoisseurs wine tasting, sharing rare tastes, rare appreciations. I sat still, unseen by them, mesmerized and bewildered. What were they doing? What on earth was going on? I could make nothing of it. It was perhaps a sort of game, but had a gravity and an intensity, a sort of serene and meditative and almost holy intensity, which I had never seen in any ordinary game before, and which I certainly had never seen before in the usually agitated and distracted twins. I contented myself with nothing down to the numbers they uttered, the numbers that manifestly gave them such delight, and which they contemplated, savored, and shared in communion. Had the numbers any meaning? I wondered on the way home. Had they any real or universal sense? Or, if any at all, a merely whimsical or private sense, like the secret and silly languages brothers and sisters sometimes work out for themselves. Hi, Eileen, how you doing? And as I drove home, I thought of Luria's twins, Leosha and Yura, brain damaged, speech damaged, identical twins, and how they would play and prattle with each other in a primitive, babble like language of their own. Luria and Udovich, 1959. John and Michael were not even using words or half words, simply throwing numbers at each other. Were these Borgesian or Funistian numbers, mere numeric finds, or pony manes, or constellations? Private number forms, a sort of number argot, known to the twins alone. Hello again, Bishop. As soon as I got home, I pulled out tables of powers, factors, logarithms, and primes. Mementos and relics of an odd, isolated period in my own childhood, when I too was something of a number brooder, a number seer, and had a peculiar passion for numbers. I already had a hunch, and now I confirmed it. All the numbers, the six-figure numbers which the twins had exchanged, were primes, i.e., numbers that could be evenly divided by no other whole number than itself or one. Had they somehow seen or possessed such a book as mine, or were they, in some unimaginable way, themselves seeing primes, in somewhat the same way as they had seen 111ness or triple 37ness? Certainly, they could not be calculating them. They could calculate nothing. I returned to the ward the next day, carrying the precious book of primes with me. I again found them closeted in their numerical communion. But this time, without saying anything, I quietly joined them. They were taken aback at first, but when I made no interruption, they resumed their game of six-figure primes. After a few minutes, I decided to join in and ventured a number, an 8-figure prime. They both turned towards me, then suddenly became still, with the look of intense concentration and perhaps wonder on their faces. There was a long pause, the longest I had ever known them to make. It must have lasted a half-minute or more. And then suddenly, simultaneously, they both broke into smiles. They had, after some unimaginable internal process of testing, suddenly seen my own 8-digit number as a prime. And this was manifestly a great joy, a double joy to them. First, because I had introduced a delightful new plaything, a prime of an order they had never previously encountered. And secondly, because it was evident that I had seen what they were doing, that I liked it, that I admired it, and that I could join in myself. They drew apart slightly, making room for me, a new number playmate, a third in their world. Then John, who always took the lead, thought for a very long time. It must have been at least 5 minutes, though I dared not move, and scarcely breathed, and brought out a 9-figure number. And after a similar time, his twin Michael responded with the similar one. And then I, in my turn, after a surreptitious look at my book, added my own rather dishonest contribution, a 10-figure prime I found in my book. There was, again, and for even longer, a wondering, still silence. And then John, after a prodigious internal contemplation, brought out a 12-figure number. I had no way of checking this and could not respond because my own book, which as far as I knew was unique of its kind, did not go beyond 10-figure primes. But Michael was up to it, though it took him 5 minutes. And an hour later, the twins were swapping 20-figure primes. At least I assume this was so, for I had no way of checking it. Nor was there any easy way in 1966, unless one had use of a sophisticated computer. And even then, it would have been difficult. For whether one uses Eratosthenes sieve or any other algorithm, there is no simple method of calculating primes. There is no simple method for primes of this order. And yet the twins were doing it. Again, I thought of Dace, whom I had read of years before in F.W.H. Myers' enchanting 1903 book, Human Personality. We know that Dace, perhaps the most successful of such prodigies, was singularly devoid of mathematical grasp. Yet he, in 12 years, made tables of factors and prime numbers for the 7th and nearly the whole of the 8th million, a task which few men could have accomplished without mechanical aid in an ordinary lifetime. He may thus be ranked, Myers concludes, as the only man who has ever done valuable service to mathematics without being able to cross the Assizes Bridge. What is not made clear by Myers, and perhaps was not clear, is whether Dace had any method for the tables he made up, or whether, as hinted in his simple number-seeing experiments, he somehow saw these great primes, as apparently the twins did. As I observed them quietly, this was easy to do because I had an office on a ward where the twins were housed. I observed them in countless other sorts of number games or number communion, the nature of which I could not ascertain or even guess at. But it seems likely or certain that they are dealing with real properties or qualities, for the arbitrary, such as random numbers, gives them no pleasure, or scarcely any at all. It is clear that they must have sense in their numbers, in the same way perhaps as a musician must have harmony. Indeed, I find myself comparing them to musicians, or to Martin in chapter 22, also retarded, who found in the serene and magnificent architectonics of Bach, the simple, oh, see, I messed that one up too. Water. I find myself comparing them to musicians, or to Martin from chapter 22, also retarded, who found in the serene and magnificent architectonics of Bach a sensible manifestation of the ultimate harmony and order of the world, wholly inaccessible to him conceptually because of his intellectual limitations. Whoever is harmonically composed, writes Sir Thomas Browne, delights in harmony and a profound contemplation of the first composer. There is something in it of divinity more than the ear discovers. It's a hieroglyphical and shadowed lesson of the whole world, a sensible fit of that harmony which intellectually sounds in the ears of God. The soul is harmonical and hath its nearest sympathy unto music. Richard Wollheim, in The Thread of Life, makes an absolute distinction between calculations and what he calls iconic mental states, and he anticipates a possible objection to this distinction. Someone might dispute the fact that all calculations are non-iconic on the grounds that, when he calculates, sometimes he does so by visualizing the calculation on a page. But this is not a counterexample. For what is represented in such cases is not the calculation itself, but a representation of it. It is numbers that are calculated, but what is visualized are numerals, which represent numbers. Leibniz on the other hand, makes a tantalizing analogy between numbers and music. The pleasure we obtain from music comes from counting, but counting unconsciously. Music is nothing but unconscious arithmetic. What, so far as we can ascertain, is the situation with the twins and perhaps others? Ernst Tosch, the composer, his grandson Lawrence Welcher tells me, could readily hold in his mind after a single hearing a very long string of numbers. But he did this by converting the string of numbers to a tune, a melody he himself shaped corresponding to the numbers. Jedediah Buxton, one of the most ponderous but tenacious calculators of all time, and a man who had a veritable, even pathological passion for calculation and counting, he would become, in his own words, drunk with reckoning, would convert music and drama to numbers. During the dance, a contemporary account of him recorded in 1754, he fixed his attention upon the number of steps. He declared, after a fine piece of music, that the innumerable sounds produced by the music had perplexed him beyond measure, and he attended even to Mr. Garrick only to count the words that he muttered, in which he said he perfectly succeeded. Here's a pretty, if extreme, pair of examples. The musician who turns numbers into music, and the counter who turns music into numbers. One could scarcely have, one feels, more opposite sorts of a mind, or at least more opposite modes of mind. Something comparable to Buxton's mode, which perhaps appears the more unnatural of the two, was shown by my patient Miriam H. in Awakenings when she had that arithmomanic manic attacks. I believe the twins, who have an extraordinary feeling for numbers, without being able to calculate at all, are allied not to the Buxton, but to talk in this manner, except, and this we ordinary people find so difficult to imagine, except that they do not convert numbers into music, but actually feel them in themselves as forms, as tones, like multitudinous forms that compose nature itself. They are not calculators, and their numeracy is iconic. They summon up, they dwell among strange scenes of numbers. They wander freely in great landscapes of numbers. They create dramaturgically a whole world made of numbers. They have, I believe, a most singular imagination, and not the least of its singularities is that it can imagine only numbers. They do not seem to operate with numbers, not iconically like a calculator. They see them directly as a vast natural scene. And if one asks, are there analogies at least to such an iconicity? One would find this, I think, in certain scientific minds. Dmitri Mendeleev, for example, carried around with him written on cards the numerical properties of elements until they became utterly familiar to him. So familiar that he no longer thought of them as aggregates of properties, but, as he tells us, as familiar faces. He now saw the elements iconically, physiognomically, as faces, faces that related like members of a family, and that made up, in toto, periodically arranged, the whole formal face of the universe. Such a scientific mind is essentially iconic and sees all nature as faces and scenes. Perhaps this music as well. This vision, this inner vision, suffused with the phenomenal, nonetheless had an integral relation with the physical, and returning it from the psychical to the physical constitutes the secondary or external work of such science. The philosopher seeks to hear within himself the echoes of the world symphony, writes Nietzsche, and to rejoin, and to reproject them in the form of concepts. Sorry, my family had a dog, a Lhasa Apso purebred, and somehow, some way, my brother stumbled across the name Nietzsche, but he didn't know how to pronounce it. So he ended up saying Nietzsche. And for whatever reason, the word Nietzsche pissed that dog off so much. It would just like, it would go off. It would be like telling a German Shepherd to get it, sick him. This dog, when you said Nietzsche, he just, ah. It was wild and it was so funny. And now I can never see Nietzsche without hearing Nietzsche and hearing the dog just go off. Hi, Amazo. How you doing? Let's do that again. The philosopher seeks to hear within himself the echoes of world symphony, writes Nietzsche, and to reproject them in the form of concepts. The twins, though morons, hear the world symphony, I conjecture, but hear it entirely in the form of numbers. The soul is harmonical, whatever one's IQ, and for some, like physical scientists and mathematicians, the sense of harmony perhaps is chiefly intellectual. And yet I cannot think of anything intellectual that is not, in some way, also sensible. Indeed, the very word sense always has this double connotation. Sensible and in some sense personal as well, for one cannot feel anything or find anything sensible unless it is in some way related or relatable to oneself. Thus, the mighty architectronics of Bach provide, as they did for Martin A hierographical, shadowed lesson of the whole world. But they are also recognizably and uniquely and dearly Bach. And this too was felt poignantly by Martin A and related by him to the love he bore his father. The twins, I believe, have not just a strange faculty, but a sensibility, a harmonic sensibility, perhaps allied to that of music. One might speak of it, very naturally, as a Pythagorean sensibility. And what is odd is not its existence, but that it is apparently so rare. One's soul is harmonical, whatever one's IQ, and perhaps the need to find or feel some ultimate harmony or order is a universal of the mind, whatever its powers and whatever form it takes. Mathematics has always been called the queen of the sciences, and mathematicians have always felt number as the great mystery, and the world as organized mysteriously by the power of number. This is beautifully expressed in the prologue to Bertrand Russell's autobiography. With equal passion, I have sought knowledge. I have wished to understand the hearts of men. I have wished to know why the stars shine. And I have tried to apprehend the Pythagorean power by which number holds sway above the flux. It is strange to compare these moron twins to an intellect, a spirit like that of Bertrand Russell, and yet it is not, I think, so far-fetched. The twins live exclusively in a thought world of numbers. They have no interest in the stars shining or the hearts of men. Yet numbers for them, I believe, are not just numbers, but significances, signifiers whose significant is the world. They do not approach numbers lightly as most calculators do. They are not interested in and have no capacity for, cannot comprehend calculations. They are, rather, serene contemplators of number and approach numbers with a sense of reverence and awe. Numbers for them are holy, fraught with significance. This is their way, as music is Martin's way, of apprehending the first composer. But numbers are not just awesome for them. They are friends too. Perhaps the only friends they have known in their isolated autistic lives. This is a rather common sentiment among people who have a talent for numbers. And Stephen Smith, while seeing method as all important, gives many delightful examples of it. George Parker Bitter, who wrote of his early number childhood, I became perfectly familiar with numbers up to 100. They became, as it were, my friends, and I knew all their relations and acquaintances. Or the contemporary Shaya Marith from India, who remarked, when I say that numbers are my friends, I mean that I have sometime in the past dealt with that particular number in a variety of ways, and on so many occasions have found new and fascinating qualities hidden in it. So if in a calculation I come across a known number, I immediately look to him as a friend. Hermann von Helmholtz, speaking of musical perception, says that though compound tones can be analyzed and broken down into their components, they are normally heard as qualities, unique qualities of tone, indivisible wholes. He speaks here of a synthetic perception, which transcends analysis and is the unanalyzable essence of all musical sense. He compares such tones to faces and speculates that we may recognize them in somewhat the same personal way. In brief, he half suggests that musical tones in certain tunes are in fact faces for the ear and are recognized, felt immediately as persons or personalities, a recognition involving warmth, emotion, and personal relation. So it seems to be with those who love numbers. These two become recognizable as such. In a single intuitive, personal, I know you. The mathematician Win Klein has put this well. Numbers are friends for me, more or less. It doesn't mean the same for you, does it? 3,844. For you, it's just a 3 and an 8 and a 4 and a 4. But I say hi, 62 squared. I believe the twins, seemingly so isolated, live in a world full of friends, that they have millions and billions of numbers to which they say hi, and which I am sure say hi back, like the Vikings did. But none of the numbers is arbitrary, like 62 squared, nor, and this is the mystery, is it arrived at by any of the usual methods, or any method so far as I can make out. The twins seem to employ a direct cognition, like angels. They see directly a universe and heaven of numbers. And this, however singular, however bizarre, but what right do we have to call it pathological? Provides a singular self-sufficiency and serenity to their lives, and one which it might be tragic to interfere with or break. Particularly fascinating and fundamental problems are raised by the perception and recognition of faces. For there is much evidence that we recognize faces, or at least familiar faces, directly, and not by any process of piecemeal analysis or aggregation. This, as we have seen, is most dramatically shown in prosopagnosia, in which, as a consequence of a lesion in the right occipital cortex, patients become unable to recognize faces as such and have to employ an elaborate, absurd, and indirect route involving a bit-by-bit analysis of meaningless and separate features. See Chapter 1. Hi, Lexi. Your friends all say hi back. Always keep a prime number of millions, though. Otherwise, it gets awkward. Right? Thank you. This serenity was, in fact, interrupted and broken up 10 years later, when it was felt that the twins should be separated. Of course, let's separate these two. Island says this is a solid argument against liberal arts education, right? Right? Not everyone fits in the box, and you can't medicate them into fitting in that box. It doesn't work. And yes, here we go. Because scientists can't leave the twins alone, can they? All throughout history. Let's separate them. Let's do different things to them. This serenity was, in fact, interrupted and broken up 10 years later, when it was felt that the twins should be separated for their own good, to prevent their unhealthy communication together, and in order that they could come out and face the world in an appropriate, socially acceptable way. As the medical and sociological jargon had it. They were separated then in 1977, with results that might be considered as either gratifying or dire. Both have been moved now into halfway houses and do menial jobs for pocket money under close supervision. They are able to take buses if carefully directed and given a token, and to keep themselves moderately presentable and clean, though their moronic and psychotic character is still recognizable at a glance. This is the positive side. But there's a negative side too, not mentioned in their charts because it was never recognized in the first place. Deprived of their numerical communion with each other, and of time and opportunity for any contemplation or communion at all, they are always being hurried or jostled from one job to another. They seem to have lost their strange numerical power, and with this the chief joy and sense of their lives. But this is considered a small price to pay, no doubt, for their having become quasi-independent and socially acceptable. One is reminded somewhat of the treatment meted out to Nadia, an autistic child with a phenomenal gift for drawing. Nadia, too, was subjected to a therapeutic regime to find ways in which her potentialities in other directions could be maximized. That was not a good period of time, was it? The net effect was that she started talking and stopped drawing. Nigel Dennis comments, "We are left with a genius who has had her genius removed, leaving nothing behind but a general defectiveness. What are we supposed to think about such a curious cure?" It should be added, this is a point dwelt on by F.W.H. Myers, whose consideration of number prodigies opens his chapter on genius, that the faculty is strange and may disappear spontaneously, uh, though it is as often lifelong. In the case of the twins, of course, it was not just a faculty, but the personal and emotional center of their lives. And now they are separated, now it is gone. There is no longer any sense or center to their lives. On the other hand, should this discussion be thought too singular or perverse, it is important to note that in the case of the twins studied by Luria, their separation was essential for their own development, unlocked them from a meaningless and sterile babble and bind, and permitted them to develop as healthy, creative people. Postscript. When he was shown the manuscript of this chapter, Israel Rosenfield pointed out that there are other arithmetics higher and simpler than the conventional arithmetic of organizations, and wondered whether the twins' singular powers and limitations might not reflect their use of such a modular arithmetic. In a note to me, he has speculated that modular algorithms of the sort described by Ian Stewart in Concepts of Modern Mathematics may explain the twins' calendrical abilities. Rosenfield wrote, their ability to determine the days of the week within an 80,000-year period suggests a rather simple algorithm. One divides the total number of days between now and then by 7. If there is no remainder, then that date falls on the same day as now. If the remainder is 1, then that date is 1 day later, and so on. Notice that the modular arithmetic is cyclic. It consists of repetitive patterns. Perhaps the twins were visualizing these patterns, either in the form of easily constructed charts or some kind of landscape, like the spiral of integers shown on page 30 of Stewart's book. This leaves unanswered why the twins communicate in primes. But calendar arithmetic requires the prime of 7. And if one is thinking of modular arithmetic in general, modular division will produce neat cyclic patterns only if one uses prime numbers. Since the prime number 7 helps the twins to retrieve dates, and consequently the events of particular days in their lives, other primes they may have found produce similar patterns to those that are so important for their acts of recollection. When they say about the matchsticks 111, 37, 3 times, note they are taking the prime 37 and multiplying it by 3. In fact, only the prime patterns could be visualized. The different patterns produced by the different prime numbers, for example, multiplication tables, may be the pieces of visual information that they are communicating to each other when they repeat a prime number. In short, modular arithmetic may help them to retrieve their past, and consequently the patterns created in using these calculations, which only occur with primes, may take on a particular significance for the twins. Lexi's, oh, hello, Swamp Donkey. How you doing? Supporting independence and forcing independence bear very different results, and yet the battle for self-determination lives on. Right? Yeah. At least it looks like they survived, although a rather empty survival for all of that. By the use of such a modular arithmetic, Ian Stewart points out one may rapidly arrive at a unique solution in situations that defeat any ordinary arithmetic. In particular, homing in by the so-called pigeonhole principle on extremely large and, by conventional methods, incomputable primes. If such methods, such visualizations are regarded as algorithms, they are algorithms of a peculiar sort, organized not algebraically, but spatially, as trees, spirals, architectures, or thoughtscapes, configurations in a formal yet quasi-sensory mental space. I've been excited by Israel Rosenfield's comments and Ian Stewart's expositions of higher, and especially modular arithmetics, for these seem to promise, if not a solution, at least a powerful illumination of otherwise inexplicable powers like those of the twins. Such higher or deeper arithmetics were conceived, in principle, by Gauss in his 1801 Disquisitions arithmétiques. Oh, sorry, I read that as French, not Latin. Either which way, but they have only been turned to practical realities in recent years. The light's moving. One has to wonder whether they may not be a conventional arithmetic, or that is, an arithmetic of operations, often irritating to teacher and student, unnatural and hard to learn, and also a deep arithmetic of the kind described by Gauss, which may be truly innate to the brain, as innate as Chomsky's deep syntax and generative grammars. Such an arithmetic, in minds like the twins, could be dynamic and almost alive. Globular clusters and nebulae of numbers, whirling and evolving in an ever-expanding mental sky. After publication of the twins, I received a great deal of communication, both personal and scientific. Some dealt with the specific themes of seeing or apprehending numbers, some with the sense or significance which might attach to this phenomenon, some with the general character of autistic dispositions and sensibilities and how they might be fostered or inhibited, and some with the question of identical twins. Especially interesting were the letters from parents of such children, the rarest and most remarkable from parents who had themselves been forced into reflection and research, and who had succeeded in combining the deepest feeling and involvement with a profound objectivity. In this category were Clara Claiborne Park and David Park, highly gifted parents of a highly gifted but autistic child. The Parks' child, Ella, was a talented artist and was also highly gifted with numbers, especially in her early years. Clara Park's book, The Siege, refers to her daughter by the pseudonym Ella, but in subsequent books and papers she uses her real name, Jessie Park. Jessie herself has now published several collections of her own artwork. She was fascinated by the order of numbers, especially primes. This peculiar feel for primes is evidently not uncommon. Clara Park wrote to me of another autistic child she knew who covered sheets of paper with numbers written down compulsively. All were primes, she noted, and added, "They are windows into another world." Later, she mentioned an experience with a young autistic man who was also fascinated by factors and primes, and how he instantly perceived these as special. Indeed, she writes, the word special must be used to elicit a reaction. Anything special, Joe, about that number? 4,875? Joe, it's just divisible by 13 and 25 of another, 7,241. It's divisible by 13 and 557. And of 8,741, it's a prime number. Park comments, no one in his family reinforces his primes. They are a solitary pleasure. It's not clear in most cases how the answers are arrived at almost instantaneously, whether they are worked out, known, remembered, or somehow just seen. What is clear is that the peculiar sense of pleasure and significance attaching to primes. Some of this seems to go with a sense of formal beauty and symmetry, but some with a peculiar associational meaning or potency. This was often called magical in Ella's case. Numbers, and especially primes, called up special thoughts, images, feelings, and relationships. Some almost too special or magical to be mentioned. This was well described in David Park's 1974 paper. Kurt Gödel, in a wholly general way, has discussed how numbers, and especially primes, can serve as markers for ideas, people, places, whatever. And such a Godlian marking would pave the way for an arithmetization or numeralization of the world. C.E. Nagel and J.R. Newman, 1958. If this does occur, it is possible that the twins and others like them do not merely live in a world of numbers, but in the world as numbers. Their number meditation or play being a sort of existential meditation. And if one can understand it, or find the key, as David Park sometimes does, a strange and precise communication too. Hello, Brian. Would have loved to have heard you read, but this day is already falling apart. Aw. I love you too, Brian, for you are a digger lover. Aw, you rock, bud. I hope it gets better. Oh. Whoop. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. That is strange. It says that it never... Okay. It looks like the stream never started on Rumble today for some reason. And it's only now telling me an hour and 20 minutes in that it didn't. Oh, and Johnny's stream broke again? Oh, for 5/6s. Is he even going? I'm almost done. Tell him to hang on. If is he even streaming still, or did he just give up on it? You let me know. I've got one chapter left, and then we're done with the book. I hope both of your days go better soon. And yeah, he's off. Okay. All right. Well then, yeah, I will finish this chapter. Either which way, we're so close to being finished. He'll be back eventually. Okay. Well, I told him I'd be coming in once we finish the reading stream. So if you can, tell him I'm on my way. All right. Final chapter, chapter 24, The Autist Artist. Draw this, I said, and gave Jose my pocket watch. He was about 21, said to be hopelessly retarded, and had earlier had one of the violent seizures from which he suffers. He was thin and fragile looking. His distraction, his restlessness suddenly ceased. He took the watch carefully, as if it were a talisman or jewel. Pardon me. Laid it before him and stared at it in motionless concentration. He's an idiot, the attendant broke in. Don't even ask him. You don't know what it is. He can't tell time. He can't even talk. They say he's autistic, but he's just an idiot. Jose turned pale, perhaps more at the attendant's tone than at its words. The attendant had said earlier that Jose doesn't use words. Go on, I said. I know you can do it. Jose drew with absolute stillness, concentrating completely on the little clock before him. Everything else shut out. Now, for the first time, he was bold, without hesitation, composed and not distracted. He drew swiftly but minutely, with a clear line, without erasures. I nearly always ask patients if it is possible for them to write and draw, partly as a rough and ready index of various competences, but also as an expression of character or style. Jose had drawn the watch with remarkable fidelity, putting in every feature, at least every essential feature. He did not put in West clock, shock resistant, made in the USA. And not just the time, though this was faithfully registered as 11:31. But every second as well, with the inset second style, and not least, the knurled winder and trapezoid clip of the watch used to attach it to a chain. The clip was strikingly amplified, though everything else remained in due proportion, and the figures, now that I came to look at them, were of different sizes, different shapes, and different styles. Some thick, some thin, some aligned and some inset, some plain and some elaborated, even a bit Gothic. And the inset second hand, rather inconspicuous in the original, had been given a striking prominence, like the small inner dials of clocks and stars, or clocks or astrolabes. Okay, so the darker one is the picture of the actual stopwatch, and that is the man's drawing. Hi, King Kong. How you doing? You're back. Is this a porn? No, it's not a porn. We're almost finished. Well, it's kind of, I don't know. We're delving into the depths of the right hemisphere of the brain. We're almost finished doing it. This last chapter. This is called the Autist Artist, in case you're just getting in. The general grasp of the thing in its feel had been strikingly brought out. All the more strikingly if, as the attendant said, Jose had no idea of time. And otherwise, there was an odd mixture of close or even obsessive accuracy with curious, and I felt droll, elaborations and variations. I was puzzled by this, haunted by it as I drove home. An idiot? Autism? No, something else was going on here. I was not called to see Jose again. The first call on a Sunday evening had been for an emergency. He'd been having seizures the entire weekend, and I had prescribed changes in his anticonvulsants over the phone in the afternoon. Now that his seizures were controlled, further neurological advice was not requested. But I was still troubled by the problems presented by the clock and felt an unresolved sense of mystery about it. I needed to see him again. So I arranged a further visit and to see his entire chart. I'd been given only a consultation slip, not very informative, when I saw him before. Jose came casually into the clinic. He had no idea and perhaps did not care why he'd been called. But his face lit up with a smile when he saw me. The dull, indifferent look, the mask I remembered, was lifted. There was a sudden, shy smile, like a glimpse through a door. I have been thinking about you, Jose, I said. He may not understand my words, but he understood my tone. I want to see more drawings, and I gave him my pen. What should I ask him to draw this time? I had, as always, a copy of Arizona Highways with me, a richly illustrated magazine, which I especially delight in which I carry around for neurological purposes, for testing my patients. The cover depicted an idyllic scene of people canoeing on a lake against a backdrop of mountains and sunset. Jose started with the foreground, a mass of near black silhouetted against the water, outlined this with extreme accuracy, and started to block it in. Sounds like a multiverse math book. Yes, it's from the Doctor, the movie Awakenings. I guess it kind of is like multiverses in a way. It kind of is. It's just how they're seeing the same stuff we're seeing, right? Or how it's all being processed. And who's to say we're the ones seeing it right? Okay. Jose started with the foreground, a mass of near black silhouetted against the water, outlined this with extreme accuracy, and started to block it in. But this was clearly a job for a paintbrush, not a fine tip pen. Skip it, I said, pointing. Go on to the canoe. Rapidly, unhesitatingly, Jose outlined the silhouetted figures in the canoe. He looked at them, then looked away, their forms fixed in his mind, then swiftly blocked them in with the side of the pen. Here again, and more impressively, because the entire scene was involved, I was amazed at the swiftness and the minute accuracy of reproduction, the more so since Jose had gazed at the canoe and then away, having taken it in. This argued strongly against any mere copying. The attendant had said earlier he's just a Xerox, and suggested that he had apprehended it as an image, exhibiting a striking power not just of copying, but of perception. For the image had a dramatic quality not present in the original. The tiny figures, enlarged, were more intense, more alive, and had the feeling of involvement and purpose not at all clear in the original. All the hallmarks of what Richard Wolfheim calls iconicity, subjectivity, intentionality, dramatization, were present. And thus, over and above the powers of mere facsimile, striking as these were, he seemed to have clear powers of imagination and creativity. It was not a canoe, but his canoe that emerged in the drawing. All right, so this one is the picture, which of course has been, mimeographed. It's black and white. But then this one over here, there, that one there is his. You can see, yeah. I like that there's more action to his canoe and people. That's cool. I turned to another page in the magazine, to an article on trout fishing, with a pastel watercolor of a trout stream, a background of rocks and trees, and in the foreground, a rainbow trout about to take fly. Draw this, I said, pointing to the fish. He gazed at it intently, seemed to smile to himself and then turned away. And now, with obvious enjoyment, his smile growing broader and broader, he drew a fish of his own. I smiled myself involuntarily as he drew it, because now, feeling comfortable with me, he was letting himself go. And what was emerging slyly was not just a fish, but a fish with character of sorts. The original had lacked character, had looked lifeless, two-dimensional, and even stuffed. Jose's fish, by contrast, tilted and poised, was richly three-dimensional, far more like a real fish than the original. It was not only verisimilitude and animation that had been added, but something else, something richly expressive and not wholly fish-like. A great cavernous whale-like mouth, a slightly crocodilian snout, an eye, one had to say, which was distinctly human, and with altogether a positively roguish look. It was a very funny fish. No wonder he had smiled. A sort of fish person, a nursery character like the frog footman in Alice. So that's his, and that's the picture. Now I had something to go on. The picture of the clock had startled me, stimulated my interest, but did not in itself allow for any thoughts or conclusions. The canoe had shown that Jose was an impressive visual memory, or had an impressive visual memory, and more. The fish showed a lively and distinctive imagination, a sense of humor, and something akin to fairy tale art. Certainly not great art, it was primitive. Perhaps it was child art, but without doubt it was art of a sort. And imagination, playfulness, and art are precisely what one does not expect in idiots or idiot savants, or in the autistic either. Such at least is the prevailing opinion. My friend and colleague Isabel Rappin had actually seen Jose for years before, when he was presented with intractable seizures in the child neurology clinic. And she, with her great experience, did not doubt that he was autistic. Of autism in general, she had written, a small number of autistic children are exceedingly proficient at decoding written language and become hyperlexic or preoccupied with numbers. Extraordinary proficiency of some autistic children for putting together puzzles, taking apart mechanical toys, or decoding written texts may reflect the consequences of attention and learning being inordinately focused on nonverbal visual spatial tasks to the exclusion of, or perhaps because of, the lack of demand for learning verbal skills. 1982, pages 146 through 150. Right? I do like it. It does give it a much more three-dimensional feel, that fish. And the personality. I like it. There's a dude on YouTube. He's autistic. His parents have been he's probably in his mid-20s, early to mid-20s. His parents take care of him full time, but he can draw the coolest little cartoons with just a Sharpie. He's got a white piece of paper and a Sharpie. So people write in and say, draw this. And he'll draw it. And it's a perfect little cartoon, whatever it is that's suggested. And they're really good cartoons. They're really cool. I wish I could remember his name. Yeah, I haven't seen any of his videos come up in my feed lately. You've seen that guy too? Yeah, he's super cool. He just sits at the kitchen table and mom or dad says, okay, so-and-so asked you to draw them this. And he just, and he's done. And it's fascinating. I love it. Just because you're not verbal the way we are verbal doesn't mean you're not there, right? It's just a matter of learning how to speak to people in their own language. On Facebook Reels. Yeah, I've seen them in YouTube Shorts, that sort of thing. I stay away from Facebook as much as possible. Facebook doesn't like me. They really, really didn't like me in COVID. And I still don't feel welcome back in their home. Somewhat similar observations, specifically about drawing, are made by Lorna Self in her astonishing book, Nadia. All idiot savant or autistic proficiencies and performances, Dr. Self gathered from the literature, were apparently based on calculation and memory alone, never on anything imaginative or personal. And if these children could draw, supposedly a very rare occurrence, their drawings too were merely mechanical, isolated islands of proficiency and splinter skills are spoken of in the literature. No allowance is made for an individual, let alone a creative personality. What then was Jose, I had to ask myself? What sort of being? What went on inside him? And how had he arrived at the state he was in? And what state was it? What might anything be done? I was both assisted and bewildered by the available information, the mass of data that had been gathered since the first onset of his strange illness, his state. King Kong, because you Canadian. Yeah, because I said a lot of stuff that was not allowed to be said. I said everything that wasn't allowed to be said, and I posted whole reams of stuff that was not being shared about. I was misinformation and disinformation both. Yeah, it cost me a friendship. Someone I've been friends with since grade freaking 4. Grade 4. Can you remember back that long? We'd been friends for that long. And then because of COVID and because I said, don't just believe what they're telling you, do your own research. Look, here's a place to start. He ended the friendship. That's it. We're no longer friends. It was ridiculous and wild. And now I won't call his sister because I don't want her to do the same to me. It's easier to just leave a message on birthdays and holidays, happy birthday, thinking of you, than have to actually have a conversation and find out that she's going to drop me too because of that, eh? It's just, yeah, it's wild. So I don't do Facebook anymore. Swamp Monkey, your dad was pretty on the nose, eh? Thing. My dad used to say that people with disabilities are the free ones, and we were the ones in an adult prison, right? We're stuck in a specific what is normal and what we should do, right? They're able to see things differently and do things differently. Bulls Dip. I broke ways with many during COVID. I cemented others. Yeah. My family, I'm very lucky. My family, we don't emote. We only talk when something really good or something really bad happens, where we really do not keep in touch on the daily, weekly, or even monthly. And when something bad happens within the family, once it's over, we pretend it didn't happen and it's never mentioned again. And we just move on, from that point. So no matter the fact that I'm the only one that stayed at Pure Blood, and I'm the only one that didn't, buy into it and all its many invariable boosters that they're still getting. But now that it's past that point where it's being forced, we all just pretend that it never happened and it just doesn't get mentioned. So we're good. I could never mention that the reason I think that they're getting sick is because of continuing to take these things that they shouldn't have taken in the first damn place. But as long as I don't say that, it didn't happen, we're good. It's not particularly healthy, but it's how we've managed to survive. So that's what you do. RRP government NPCs. Yeah. Island said, I had someone unfriend me on Facebook because I pointed out that birth certificates are changed when you're adopted, and ID laws for voting wouldn't keep adoptees from voting. Oh, that one. I've got another friend who is certain, not the friend isn't certain. They have someone in their life who is certain that those laws mean that a woman, if she gets married, is absolutely screwed. She won't be able to vote because her married name won't match her birth certificate. Like they can't, you know, like the government's not going to go, okay, you got married, name change, fair enough. That law was written poorly and it was explained even more poorly. And yeah, people are out there thinking they're not going to be allowed to vote if they get married and take their husband's name. And it's sad. There's people thinking that out there. Lexi, your family's like that too? Yeah. Once the bad thing is over, you just pretend it never happened. Like that whole thing is just in a box and it's locked up tight and it's chucked way far in the back and it's already covered in dust and it'll never be mentioned again. It just never happened. You know, my horrible marriage never happened. We never talk about that time. We never talk about my ex-husband. We never talk about any of it. Just didn't happen. It just cut it out, chucked, it's gone. So yeah, it's not maybe not the healthiest way, but it works. Swamp Donkey said Canada changed with COVID. Heck yeah. Especially Facebook and news stuff. Yeah. Swamp Donkey, were you yes, this one is sweetheart. This one is sweets. She's on the newsstand. I went and cleaned 2 hours at the neighbor's house so that my girls could have a stand and not a cardboard box to sit in when I was streaming like this. So this is sweetheart. Oh, she likes to do the flop over, but she never leaves herself enough space to roll over. It's just into empty air. She's the clumsiest cat I've ever met, ever. Ever. Yes, she is pretty cute. Yeah. Exactly. Chuck it in the fuck it bucket. Exactly. That entire year's worth of time that was COVID just never happened. Nothing never happened. Hello, SH. How you doing? There are things that would have been helpful to know that happened with the grandparents and great grandparents generations, but we don't talk about unpleasant things. I'm just now hearing some things. Yeah, I had no idea that my grandparents, like I was too old they were gone long before I was old enough to understand the lessons I could have, learned from them. My dad's dad I never met. He died of an embolism in the brain, just dropped dead one day. He'd only met my mom twice. And then my mom's mom died before I was 3. And so I got to know granddad and grandma, but even granddad lived far away. So we only got to see him on family vacations, His brothers, granddad's brother's the one who shared a fence line with Dan Block, who played Haas on Bonanza. Yeah. There's some old-timey Canadian history there. Anyways, I digressed. Okay. I was both assisted and bewildered by the available information. The massive data that had been gathered since the first onset of his strange illness, his state. I had a lengthy chart available to me containing early descriptions of his original illness. A very high fever at the age of 8, associated with the onset of incessant continuing seizures, and the rapid appearance of a brain damaged or autistic condition. There had been doubt from the start about what exactly was going on. His spinal fluid had been abnormal during the acute stage of the illness. The consensus was that he had probably suffered an encephalitis of sorts. His seizures were of many different types: petit mal, grand mal, akinetic, psychomotor, and these last being seizures of an exceptionally complex type. Psychomotor seizures can also be associated with sudden passion and violence, and the occurrence of peculiar behavior states that even between seizures, the so-called psychomotor personality, they are invariably associated with disorder in or damage to the temporal lobes. And severe temporal lobe disorder, both left and right-sided, had been demonstrated in Jose by innumerable EEGs. The temporal lobes are also associated with auditory capacities, and in particular, the perception and production of speech. Dr. Rappin had not only considered Jose autistic, but had wondered whether a temporal lobe disorder had caused a verbal auditory agnosia, an inability to recognize speech sounds that interfered with his capacity to use or understand the spoken word. For what was striking, however it was to be interpreted, and both psychiatric and neurological interpretations were offered, was the loss or regression of speech, so that Jose, previously normal, or so his parents avowed, became mute and ceased talking to others when he became ill. One capacity was apparently spared, perhaps in a compensatory way enhanced, an unusual passion and power to draw, which had been evident since early childhood and seemed to some extent hereditary and or familial, for his father had always been fond of sketching, and his much older brother was a successful artist. With the onset of his illness, with the seemingly intractable seizures, he might have 20 or 30 major convulsions a day, my goodness, and uncounted little seizures, falls, blanks, or dreamy states. With the loss of speech and his general intellectual and emotional regression, Jose found himself in a strange and tragic state. His schooling was discontinued, though a private tutor was provided for a while, and he was returned permanently to his family as a full-time epileptic, autistic, perhaps asphasic, retarded child. He was considered ineducable, untreatable, and generally hopeless. At the age of 9, he dropped out of school, out of society, out of almost all of what for a normal child would be reality. For 15 years, he scarcely emerged from the house, ostensibly because of intractable seizures, his mother maintaining she dared not take him out, otherwise he would have 20 or 30 seizures in the street every day. All sorts of anticonvulsants were tried, but his epilepsy seemed untreatable. This, at least, was the stated opinion in his chart. There were older brothers and sisters, but Jose was much the youngest, the big baby of a woman approaching 50. We have far too little information about these intervening years. Jose, in effect, disappeared from the world and was lost to follow-up, not only medically but generally, and might have been lost forever, confined and convulsing in his cellar room, had he not blown up violently very recently and been taken to the hospital for the first time. He was not entirely without inner life in the cellar. He showed a passion for pictorial magazines, especially natural history, of the National Geographic type. And when he was able, between seizures and scoldings, would find stumps of pencil and draw what he saw. These drawings were perhaps his only link with the outside world, and especially the world of animals and plants, of nature, which he had so loved as a child, especially when he went out sketching with his father. This and this only he was permitted to retain, his one remaining link with reality. This then was the tale I received, or rather put together from his chart or charts, documents as remarkable for what they lacked as for what they contained. The documentation through default of a 15-year gap from a social worker who had visited the house, taken an interest in him, but could do nothing, and from his now aged and ailing parents as well. But none of this would have come to light had there not been a rage of a sudden, unprecedented, and frightening violence. A fit in which the objects were smashed, which brought Jose to a state hospital for the first time. It was far from clear what had caused this rage, whether it was an eruption of epileptic violence, such as one may see on rare occasions with very severe temporal lobe seizures. Get off the table. I'm almost done. Or whether it was, in the simplest terms of his admission note, simply a psychosis, or whether it represented some final desperate call for help from a tortured soul who was mute and had no direct way of expressing his predicament, his needs. I like that, Lexi. I work for my dad. We fight in the morning, talk politics in the afternoon. Then he tolerates being ignored on evenings and weekends. No, Boo. Sorry. She's being especially willful these days. That's sweets. Let go. This is Boo. She's getting fussy and thinking she's allowed to walk on the table, even though she's not, because she's going to knock over the water bottle or the coffee, and it's going to get into the tablet and the phone and all the other stuff. Hi, I do like you perched over here, though. It's kind of like I've got the good angel, the bad angel on my shoulders, telling me what to do. Keep reading. I'm loving it. Would you hurry up and feed me? Boo is the boss, for sure. And yes, SH, I'd love to hear about your grandma sometime. Yeah. These things fascinate me. No, no, no. I literally have to do this. Build walls to keep her from it. Stay away from me. My cold coffee and my water. Let me finish reading. I'm almost done, love. Okay? I'm almost done. Your baby cat just woke up from his long nap. He'll cause trouble too. Yeah. It's what they do, right? You're not going to let that just sit, are you? No, you're not. What was clear was that coming to the hospital and having his seizures controlled by powerful new drugs for the first time gave him some space and freedom, a release both physiological and psychological, of a sort he had not known since the age of 8. Yeah, they don't hold the cats back at all. Hospitals, state hospitals, are often seen as total institutions in Irving Goffman's sense, geared mainly to the degradation of the patients. And doubtless this happens, and on a vast scale. But they may also be asylums in the best sense of the word, a sense perhaps scarcely allowed by Goffman. Places that provide a refuge for the tormented, storm-tossed soul, provide it with just that mixture of order and freedom of will it stands in such need. Jose had suffered from confusion and chaos, partly organic epilepsy, partly the disorder of his life, and from confinement and bondage, also both epileptic and existential. Hospital was good for Jose, perhaps life-saving at this point in his life, and there is no doubt that he himself felt this fully. Suddenly, too, after the moral closeness, the febrile intimacy of his house, he now found others, found a world both professional and concerned, unjudging, unmoralistic, unaccusing, detached, but at the same time with a real feeling both for him and for his problems. At this point, therefore, he had now been in hospital for 4 weeks. He started to have hope, started to become more animated, to turn to others as he had never done before, not at least since the onset of autism when he was 8. Getting him a treadmill. She wouldn't stay on it, honestly. If I get something specifically for her, that's the one thing I'm guaranteed she's going to ignore forever. I do have, if you can see, especially now, instead of 2 cardboard boxes, we've got a 3-level tower before it hits the ground. They can jump from that to the table, go over there. They can go across the railing. They can jump onto the cat box or the cat stand with the big circle on it. Boo likes hiding inside of the tube, but they can also get on the bookshelf. And if they climb along the bookshelf just right, they can hop up on top of what is considered a pantry. It's a tiny little closet, not a pantry. But from there, they can run all the way across the tops of the cupboards. They've got about this much space between the ceiling and the top of the cupboards. So they can do almost the entire circuit of the place without touching the floor. It's a lot of fun. Your cats are jealous. Yeah, well, it's just me and them. So they really do like playing the floor is lava. Besides which, she does get a lot of running. She runs from the one window in the kitchen right here, up and down the death stairs behind that railing there, to the front door, which has a window. And then she'll go spazzing out into the bedroom, which also has a window. So she can do the 3-way. They've got more than enough space to run in. You wanted to get a giant kitty wheel, but it's too much money to spend on the chance you might. Exactly. That's why I never got a kitty wheel, because more likely than not, they'll do nothing but sleep on the bottom of it. And there's no point in spending that much money on what could easily just be another pillow for them. Oh, Swamp Monkey, you have no idea. They are death stairs. They start at the top. Okay, over here. You can kind of see the railing, that's the black of my hood, my jacket. So that's the level right there. But they go an entire story down to the ground in not a whole lot of space. And they're different heights, and they're also different depths. They're deadly. They're so deadly. Your dog wants to come chase or lay with the kitties. Play with the kitties. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. No, they're it's almost lunchtime, so they're starting to get antsy. As they do, because they're starving. They get fed 3 times a day, but they're starving. Yeah, they're not necessarily up to code per se. In the front door, when you open the door to enter the house, it starts at stairs. There's no landing at all. It's literally, there's a little lip. A little lip, less than this much. Probably about that much of a lip. And then it goes right into the first stair. So you're just stare. It ain't the safest thing. But the rent is stupid cheap. The guy downstairs has, I've got a bedroom. It doesn't have a door. It's an almost 1 bedroom. So it's got 3 walls and a window. in a separate area, but there's no door. And I've got an extra room. He pays $1,200 for just this space in the bathroom downstairs. It's it's insane. There's no way I could afford to move if I wanted. All right. Anyways, we're so close to done. Yeah, if the intruder breaks in, he'll probably be paraplegic. I can, yeah, quite easily fend people off from the top of the stairs. I can definitely do that. And if the zombies ever break in, the door opens out. So no matter how hard they lean, it won't break in. So if the humans take over, they'll have to bust the bolts out of the rusty door hinges to try and take the door off before they can even try and coming up those stairs. So I'm good. Anyways, let's see how much life gets better for him now that he's found a place where people kind of understand him a bit better, eh? But hope and turning to others, interaction was forbidden, and no doubt frighteningly complex and dangerous as well. Jose had lived for 15 years in a guarded, closed world, in what Bruno Bettelheim, in his book on autism, called the empty fortress. But it was not, and it had never been for him, entirely empty. There had always been his love for nature, for animals and plants. This part of him, this door, had always remained open. But now there was a temptation and pressure to interact. Pressure that was often too much and came too soon. And precisely at such times, Jose would relapse, would turn again as if for comfort and security to the isolation, to the primitive rocking movements he had first shown. The third time I saw Jose, I did not send for him in the clinic, but went up without warning to the admission ward. He was sitting rocking in a frightful day room, his face and eyes closed, a picture of regression. I had a qualm of horror as I saw him like this, for I had imagined, had indulged the notion of a steady recovery. I had to see Jose in a regressed condition, as I was to do again and again, to see that there was no simple awakening for him, but a path fraught with the sense of danger, double jeopardy, terrifying as well as exciting, because he had come to love his prison bars. If you're listening, I just want to say turn it loose. Turn it loose and fuck the world. Just turn it loose. As soon as I called him, he jumped up and eagerly, hungrily followed me to the art room. Once more, I took a fine pen from my pocket, for he seemed to have an aversion to crayons, which was all they had used on the ward. That fish you drew, I hinted at it with a gesture in the air, not knowing how much of my words he might understand. That fish, can you remember it? Can you draw it again? He nodded eagerly and took the pen from my hands. It was 3 weeks since he had seen it. What would he draw now? He closed his eyes for a moment, summoning an image, and then drew. It was still a trout, rainbow spotted, with fringy fins and a forked tail, but this time with egregiously human features, an odd nostril. What fish has nostrils? And a pair of ripely human lips. I was about to take the pen, but no, he was not finished. What had he in mind? The image was complete. The image, perhaps, but not the scene. The fish before had existed as an icon, in isolation. Now it was to become a part of a world, a scene. Rapidly, he sketched in a little fish, a companion, swooping into the water, gambling, obviously in play. I am so sorry. Not cool. Not cool at all. I may or may not have forgotten to take the recycling, including the empty pizza box, out of the house this morning, and she's decided that now is the time to get into it. Oh, this is a cool little picture that he's drawing. Rapidly, he sketched in a little fish, a companion, swooping into the water, gamboling, obviously in play. And then the surface of the water was sketched in, rising to a sudden tumultuous wave. As he drew the wave, he became excited and emitted a strange, mysterious cry. I couldn't avoid the feeling, perhaps a facile one, that this drawing was symbolic. Little fish and a big fish, perhaps him and me. But what was so important and exciting was the spontaneous representation, the impulse, not my suggestion, entirely from himself, to introduce this new element, a living interplay in what he drew. In his drawings, as in his life hitherto, interaction had always been absent. Now, if only in play, if only in play, in symbol, it was allowed back. Or was it? What was that angry, avenging wave? Well, the wave is flowing away from them too, so I don't think it's an angry, avenging wave. Oh, other way, sorry. So he does that first fish, pretty similar. I don't know why he gave him nostrils, but yeah, he puts the second one in playing with the water and the wave. That's pretty cool. Best to go back to safe ground, I felt. No more free association. I had seen potential, but I had seen and heard danger too. Back to safe, Edenic, prelapsarian Mother Nature. I found a Christmas card lying on a table, a robin redbreast on a tree trunk, snow and stark twigs all around. All around. I gestured to the bird and gave Jose the pen. The bird was finely drawn, and he used a red pen for the breast. The feet were somewhat taloned, grasping the bark. I was struck here and later by his need to emphasize the grasping power of hands and feet, to make contact sure, almost gripping and obsessed. But what was happening? The dry winter twiglet next to the tree trunk had shot up in his drawing, expanded into florid open bloom. There were other things that were perhaps symbolic, although I could not be sure. But the salient and exciting and most significant transformation was this, that Jose had changed winter into spring. Oh, Amber alerts. That's why it felt weird. Too far away from here to be anything right now. Johnny's Walker once mistook my hat for a wife. Ooh, that may have been awkward as well, eh? But yes, I'll read it after, but you can see it was definitely winter in the photo, and then in the there we go. He's most definitely changed it into springtime. That's kind of cool. Now, finally, he started to speak, though speak is much too strong a term for the strange sounding, stumbling, largely unintelligible utterances that came out, on occasion startling him as much as they startled us. For all of us, Jose included, had regarded him as wholly and incorrigibly mute, whether from incapacity or indisposition, or both. There had been the attitude as well as the fact of not speaking. And here, too, we found it impossible to say how much was organic, how much was a matter of motivation. We had reduced, though not annulled, his temporal lobe disorders. Holy Hannah. Oh, geez, Louise. If you guys pray, there is a little boy, 2 years old, on a ventilator that's just been pronounced kidnapped missing from Vancouver, British Columbia. It'll be a long time before they get up here, the hours before they get up here. But if you pray, please pray that they get him back to the hospital ASAP. It's pretty important if they're sending out 3 separate Amber alerts. We had reduced, though not annulled, his temporal lobe disorders. His encephalograms, his EEGs. Can we not just say EEGs? I'm going to say that. His EEGs were never normal. They still showed in these lobes a sort of low-grade electrical muttering, occasional spikes, dysrhythmia, and slow waves. But they were immensely improved compared with what they had been when he came in. If he could remove their convulsiveness, he could not reverse the damage they had sustained. We had improved, it could not be doubted, his physiological potentials for speech, though there was an impairment of his abilities to use, understand, and recognize speech, with which, doubtless, he would always have to contend. But equally important, he now was fighting for the recovery of his understanding and speech. Egged on by all of us and guided by the speech therapist in particular, where previously he had accepted it hopelessly or masochistically, and indeed had turned against virtually all communication with others, verbal and otherwise. Speech impairment and the refusal to speak had coupled before in the double malignancy of disease. Oh, cat fur everywhere. Now, recovery of speech and attempts to speak were being happily coupled in the double benignity of beginning to get well. Even to the most sanguine of us, it was very apparent that Jose would never speak with any facility approaching normal, that speech could never, for him, be a real vehicle for self-expression, could serve only to express his simpler needs. And he himself seemed to feel this too, and while he continued to fight for speech, turned more fiercely to drawing for self-expression. One final episode. Jose had been moved off the frenzied admission ward to a calmer, quieter special ward, more home-like, less prison-like than the rest of the hospital. A ward with an exceptional number and quality of staff, designed especially, as Bettelheim would say, as a home for the heart, for patients with autism who seem to require a kind of loving and dedicated attention that few hospitals can give. When I went up to this new ward, He waved his hand lustily as soon as he saw me, an outgoing, open gesture. I could not imagine him having done this before. He pointed to the locked door. He wanted it open. He wanted to go outside. He led the way downstairs, outside, into the overgrown sunlit garden. So far as I could learn, he had not voluntarily gone outside since he was 8, since the very start of his illness and withdrawal. Nor did I have to offer him a pen. He took one himself. We walked around the hospital grounds, Jose sometimes gazing at the sky and trees, but more often down at his feet, at the mauve and yellow carpet of clover and dandelions beneath us. He had a very quick eye for plant forms and colors, rapidly saw and picked a rare white clover, and found a still rarer four-leafed one. He found 7 different types of grass, no less, and seemed to recognize, to greet, each one as a friend. Hello, Rusty. I know, snuffleupagus is what I was trying not to say. He was delighted most of all by the great yellow dandelions, open, all their florets hung open to the sun. This was his plant. It was how he felt, and to show his feeling, he would draw it. The need to pay graphic reverence was immediate and strong. He knelt down, placed his clipboard on the ground, and holding the dandelion, drew it. This, I think, is the first drawing from real life that Jose had done since his father took him sketching as a child, before he became ill. It is a splendid drawing, accurate and alive. It shows his love for reality, for another form of life. It is, to my mind, rather similar to and not inferior to the fine, vivid flowers one finds in medieval botanies and herbals, fastidiously botanically exact, even though Jose has no formal knowledge of botany and could not be taught it or understand it if he tried. His mind is not built for the abstract, the conceptual. That's not available to him as a path to truth. But he has a passion and a real power for the particular. He loves it. He enters into it and he recreates it. And the particular, if one is particular enough, is also a road, one might say nature's road, to reality and truth. The abstract, the categorical, has no interest for this autistic person. The concrete, the particular, the singular is all. Whether this is a question of capacity or disposition, it is strikingly the case. Lacking or indisposed to the general, the autistic seems to compose their world picture entirely of particulars. Thus they live not in a universe, but in what William James called a multiverse. There you go. Who was it that said the multiverse? Where is it? I cannot find it now. I think it was, yes, there it was. It was the Swamp Donkey. Yes, the multiverse. We wound up at the same spot as you. Thus they live not in a universe, but what William James calls a multiverse, of innumerable exact and passionately intense particulars. It is a mode of mind at the opposite extreme of the generalizing, the scientific, but still real, equally real in a quite different way. Such a mind has been imagined in Borges' story of Fuentes. I really messed that one. Such a mind has been imagined in Borges' story, Funes the Memorious, so like Luria's mnemonist. He was, let us not forget, almost incapable of ideas of general, Platonic sort. In the world teeming In the teeming world of Funes, there were only details, almost immediate in their presence. No one has felt the heat and the pressure of a reality as indefatigable as that which day and night converged upon this hapless Ireneo. As for Borges, Ireneo, not so for Jose. But it is not necessarily a hapless circumstance. There may be a deep satisfaction in particulars, especially if they shine, as they may do for Jose, with an emblematic radiance. I think Jose, an artist, a simpleton too, has such a gift for the concrete, for form, that he is, in his way, a naturalist and a natural artist. He grasps the world as forms, directly and intensely felt forms, and reproduces them. He has fine literal powers, but he has figurative powers too. He can draw a flower or a fish with remarkable accuracy, but he can also make one which is a personification, an emblem, a dream, or a joke. And the artists are supposed to lack imagination, playfulness, and art. Creatures like Jose are not supposed to exist. Autistic child artists like Lorna Self's Nadia were not supposed to exist. Are they indeed so rare, or are they just overlooked? Nigel Dennis, in a brilliant essay on Nadia in the New York Review of Books, wonders how many of the world's Nadias may be dismissed or overlooked, their remarkable productions crumpled up and consigned to the trash can, or simply, like Jose, treated without thought, as an odd talent, isolated, irrelevant, and of no interest. But the autistic artist, or to be less lofty, the autistic imagination is by no means rare. I have seen a dozen examples of it in as many years, and this is without making any particular effort to find them. The autistic, by their nature, are seldom open to influence. It is their fate to be isolated and thus original. Their vision, if it can be glimpsed, comes from within and appears aboriginal. They seem to me, as I see more of them, to be a strange species in our midst, odd, original, wholly inwardly directed, unlike others. Autism was once seen as a childhood schizophrenia, but phenomenologically, the reverse is the case. The schizophrenic's complaint is always of influence from the outside. He is passive, he is played upon, he cannot be himself. The autistic would complain, if they complained, of absence of influence, of absolute isolation. No man is an island entire unto itself, wrote Don. But this is precisely what autism is, an island cut off from the main. In classical autism, which is manifest and often total by the 3rd year of life, the cutting off is so early, there may be no memory of the main. In secondary autism, like Jose's, caused by brain disease at a later stage in life, there is some memory, perhaps some nostalgia for the main. This may explain why Jose was more accessible than most, and why, at least in drawing, he may show interplay taking place. Is being an island, being cut off, necessarily a death? It may be a death, but it is not necessarily so. For through horizontal connections with others, with society and culture, are lost. I was right. Yet there may be vital and intensified vertical connections, direct connections with nature, with reality, uninfluenced, unmediated, untouchable by any others. This vertical contact is very striking with Jose, hence the piercing directness, the absolute clarity of his perceptions and drawings, without a hint or shade of ambiguity or indirection. A rock-like power uninfluenced by others. This brings us to our final question. Is there any place in the world for a man who is like an island, who cannot be acculturated, made part of the main? Can the main accommodate, make room for the singular? There are similarities here to the social and cultural reactions to genius. Of course, I do not suggest that all autists have genius, only that they share with genius the problem of singularity. Specifically, what does the future hold for Jose? Is there some place for him in the world which will employ his autonomy but leave it intact? Could he, with his fine eye and great love of plants, make illustrations for botanical works or herbals? Be an illustrator for zoology or an anatomy text? See the drawing on the next page. He made for me when I showed him a textbook illustration of the layered tissue called ciliated epithelium. Could he accompany scientific expeditions and make drawings? He paints and makes models with equal facility of rare species. His pure concentration on the thing before him would make him ideal in such situations. Here's the ciliated epithelium from the trachea of a kitten, magnified 255 times. Real one's top, his is the bottom. There, that's better. I don't think I showed you either. I can't remember, not certain, so I'll show you. There was the flower that he drew. So he can definitely draw what he sees. Or, to take a strange but not illogical leap, could he, with his peculiarities, his idiosyncrasy, do drawings for fairy tales, nursery tales, Bible tales, or myths? Or, since he cannot read and sees letters only as pure and beautiful forms, could he not illustrate and elaborate the gorgeous capitals of manuscript breviaries and missals? He has done beautiful altarpieces in mosaic and stained wood for churches. He has carved exquisite lettering on tombstones. His current job is hand printing sundry notices for the ward, which he does with the flourishes and elaborations of a latter-day Magna Carta. All this he could do, and do very well. And it would be of use and delight to others, and delight him too. He could do all of these, but alas, he will do none, unless someone very understanding, and with opportunities and means, can guide and employ him. For as the stars stand, he will probably do nothing and spend a useless, fruitless life, as so many other autistic people do, overlooked, unconsidered, in the back ward of a state hospital. Postscript. After publication of this piece, I again received many off-prints and letters, the most interesting being from Dr. Clara Claiborne Park. It is indeed clear, as Nigel Dennis suspected, that even though Nadia may have been unique, a sort of Picasso, artistic gifts of fairly high order are not uncommon among the autistic. Testing for artistic potential, as in the Goodenough Draw a Man intelligence test, is almost useless. There must occur, as with Nadia, Jose, and the Park's daughter Ella, a spontaneous production of striking drawings. In an important and richly illustrated review of Nadia, Dr. Park brings out, on the basis of experience with her own child, no less than from a perusal of the world literature, what seemed to be the cardinal characteristics of such drawings. These include negative characteristics, such as derivativeness, stereotypy, and positive ones, such as the unusual capacity for delayed rendition, and for rendering the object as perceived, not as conceived. Hence the sort of inspired naivete especially seen. She also notes a relative indifference to display of others' reactions, which might seem to render such children untrainable. And yet, manifestly, this need not be the case. Such children are not necessarily unresponsive to teaching or attention, but this may need to be of a very special type. In addition to experience with her own child, who is now an accomplished adult artist, Dr. Park cites also the fascinating and insufficiently known experiences of the Japanese, especially Morishima and Matsugi, who have had remarkable success in bringing autists from an untutored and seemingly unteachable childhood giftedness to professionally accomplished adult artistry. Morishima favors special instructional techniques, highly structured skill training, a sort of apprenticeship in the classical Japanese culture tradition, and encouragement of drawing as a means of communication. But such formal training, though crucial, is not enough. A more intimate, empathic relationship is required. The words with which Dr. Park concludes her review may properly conclude the world of the simple. The secret may lie elsewhere, in the dedication that led Matsugi to live with another retarded artist in his home and to write. The secret in developing Yanamura's talent was to share his spirit. The teacher should love the beautiful, honest, retarded person and live with a purified, retarded world. Imagine they used to give lobotomies to those people who were clearly not gone. JFK's sister was one, Rose or Rosa. I'm pretty sure it was Rose. Yeah, that was a sad story. But that's it, kids. We have finished The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Next week, we will start Prepare, the Handbook for Individual Freedom, written by my friend Stephen Gosney. I won't be reading from this. He has kindly sent me the latest edition of this book, so I will be reading from that. Island, one of my very favorite books. Thanks for reading it. Thank you. I'm so glad that Jeff suggested it and I got it. And I'm very, very glad that I'll get a chance to, I had the chance to share it with you guys. So, yep, next Thursday morning, 11 a.m. Pacific time, we will start Prepare. In the meantime, I have heard from our friend Johnny. He's having a crappy streamy day. He's a bit annoyed, but I am still doing like Thursdays at 4 p.m. Pacific, 6 Central, 7 Eastern. Do your own math. 4 p.m. That's 2.5 hours from now. I will be coming back live again, chatting with chat, and perhaps if he feels like it, I'll have Johnny join me, and maybe he can share some of the stuff he was meant to share with us today on his normal stream. Maybe he can share it tonight. But either which way, kids, I'm going to love you and leave you. I will see you, as I said, 2.5 hours from now. I'll see you again and we can all chitty chat. Okay? Talk to you soon.
Change from day to day. Science, art, or history's play. No path too twisted, no trail too thin. She dives right in where to begin. Nothing's too obscure. She'll dig and take a spirit so pure. From ancient lore to future dreams, every question finds its gleam.